He stood there, arms crossed, smirking like he had already won. "You do not have what it takes," he said. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or show any anger. I just slid my resignation letter across his desk and watched his expression change from smug to confused. "If I do not have what it takes," I said calmly, "let us see if the team can run without me." 2 weeks later, the servers went dark, and the biggest client in our portfolio demanded me by name. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Gavin Vance, and I was the lead systems architect at Summit Solutions, a mid-sized software firm in Portland, Oregon, that handled cloud infrastructure and custom logistics databases. That was a fancy title. But what it really meant was that I was the guy who knew where all the digital bodies were buried. Every line of legacy code, every complex integration, and every temporary workaround we had ever deployed to keep our clients happy had passed through my hands. I had built the core database engine from scratch over my 7 years with the company, and I knew its quirks better than anyone alive. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. I was at my desk by 7:30, holding a mug of black coffee with no sugar. My kids, Chloe and Toby, had decided their clothes were unwearable, meaning my wife Clara handled breakfast while I played fashion consultant. Chloe complained her shirt looked childish, while Toby wanted to wear pajamas. By the time I arrived at the office, I was running on caffeine and patience, which was not the best state of mind for what was waiting for me. Preston Jennings, our new vice president of engineering, arrived 3 months ago from a failed startup. He loved corporate buzzwords, speaking constantly about synergy and disruption. He wore designer sneakers with expensive suits and made sure everyone knew he had worked at companies with famous names. From his first day, he made it clear. He thought our development practices were old-fashioned. He did not care that our systems had a 97% uptime rate, or that our clients had stayed with us for years. None of that mattered to Preston because we were not cutting edge. During his first month, he suggested we migrate our entire transaction database to a raw framework that had been released just 6 weeks prior. When I pointed out that using an unproven framework for systems handling millions of dollars in shipping transactions was a massive risk, he smiled patronizingly and told me that we needed fresh perspectives. His fresh perspective turned out to mean his own opinion, and any disagreement was treated as resistance to modern progress. I had dealt with difficult managers before in my 25 years in software, but Preston was a different breed. He possessed a dangerous combination of high confidence and low technical competence. The storm broke when an email landed in my inbox at 8:15. The subject line was Department Optimization Initiative. In my experience, when corporate managers use words like optimization, it means someone is about to get hurt. The email detailed a complete restructuring of the department. My team of 8 engineers was being broken up and redistributed. My role as lead systems architect was being eliminated, replaced by a collaborative engineering pool. I was being demoted, even if they did not have the courage to write that word. Worse, the person chosen to oversee the technical direction of the new pool was Preston's close friend from his previous startup, a guy named Bradley Higgins. Bradley had exactly 2 years of professional experience and a habit of using the word literally in every sentence, usually incorrectly. I read the email 3 times, hoping I had misread the text, but it was clear. I was being pushed out of the company I had helped build, and the announcement had been sent to the entire company before anyone had even spoken to me. My phone began to buzz with texts from my team. Jared, my senior developer, sent a message asking what was happening. Nora, our database engineer, asked if I was okay. I did not reply. I walked straight to Preston's office, knocked once, and stepped inside. He was on a call but made me wait for 2 minutes while he talked about projections. When he hung up, he did not apologize. He just leaned back in his chair and asked what he could do for me. I told him we needed to discuss the restructuring email. He immediately claimed it was not personal, that they were trying to break down departmental silos. I pointed out that my team had the highest performance ratings in the firm, and that we had kept the systems stable for years. Preston dismissed my arguments, saying past performance did not guarantee future success in a changing market. He implied that I was unable to adapt to new methodologies. I asked if this was about the Altus shipping project, where I had argued against his plan to use an unstable database structure. Preston's face tightened. That project had been his plan to show off to the board, and the chief technology officer had sided with my warnings. This restructuring was his revenge. Preston looked at me and said he did not believe I had what it takes to lead the team where it needed to go. The room went silent. I looked at him, realizing he wanted a fight, but I was too tired for his games. I told him he was right, which caught him off guard. I explained that if having what it takes meant deploying untested code and treating experienced engineers like obstacles, then I did not want any part of it. I told him I was done and that my resignation letter would be on his desk by 5 o'clock. After I walked out of Preston's office, the office felt different. The news of my resignation traveled faster than a server warning. By lunchtime, my inbox was filled with messages of support from engineers and quiet congratulations from people who wished they had the guts to do the same. I spent the afternoon organizing my files and preparing my transition documents. I had a 2-week notice period to fulfill, and I resolved to leave with my professionalism intact. I spent those 2 weeks writing a detailed guide to our entire cloud database infrastructure. It ended up being a document of 127 pages, covering every system quirk, password location, and failover procedure. I scheduled 3 transfer sessions to walk the team through the architecture. Bradley Higgins, the guy who was taking over my responsibilities, showed up to only 1 session. He spent the entire hour looking at his phone, and later asked if I could send him a short summary of the main points. I realized then that he had no intention of reading my documentation. He believed that his 2 years of startup experience had taught him everything he needed to know about running an enterprise system. On my second to last day, Jared took me out for a quiet lunch at a diner down the street. He told me that the team was already looking for new jobs. Nora had 2 interviews lined up, and Sean had updated his resume the day I resigned. Jared explained that the team was loyal to me, not to Summit Solutions, and they did not trust Preston or Bradley. I told him to be careful and not to leave without having another job secured, but I knew he was right. The environment was turning toxic. My final day arrived on a Friday. The HR manager organized a small gathering in the break room with a supermarket cake and a card signed by the staff. Preston made a short speech about my contributions and wished me luck, which was hard to watch, given that he had spent the last 3 months finding ways to push me out. I packed my desk into a single cardboard box, handed in my security badge, and left the building at 5 o'clock. When I got home, Clara had made my favorite dinner, and we sat on the porch talking about the future. I had a decent amount of savings, enough to last us 6 months without worry, but the sudden lack of a daily routine was jarring. For 7 years, my life had been dictated by server alerts and code releases. Now, my mornings were entirely free. I helped Toby with his first-grade math homework, which involved drawing circles to represent numbers. I found myself explaining that numbers were created so we did not have to draw circles, which made Clara laugh. By the second week of my unemployment, my phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. I answered, and a professional voice introduced herself as Audrey Frost, the Director of Information Technology at Altus Shipping. Altus Shipping was our largest client, contributing a massive portion of Summit Solutions' annual revenue. I had worked closely with Audrey 3 years ago when we first built their logistics system. She told me she had heard I left Summit Solutions and wanted to know if I was available for a project. I asked how she had found out so quickly, and she explained that she had run into issues with their database logs and had called Summit Solutions for help. She had spoken with Preston, and his arrogant, dismissive attitude had raised red flags. Audrey explained that their system was showing intermittent authentication failures. Some users could log in while others were blocked. When she pushed Preston for a solution, he had told her it was likely user error on her end. Audrey knew their internal network was fine and was alarmed by his refusal to investigate the server logs. She told me she was going to give Summit Solutions until Friday to resolve the issue. If they failed, she planned to invoke the system reliability clause in their contract. That clause allowed Altus Shipping to demand that Summit Solutions bring in the original system architect to fix any critical failures, with the firm covering the entire cost. She asked if I would be willing to return as an independent contractor if she made the call. I told her I would be ready. I spent that evening reviewing my personal backups of the Altus Shipping database schema, trying to understand what could cause those specific errors. The system was designed to be highly redundant with automatic failovers. For it to fail intermittently, someone had to have modified the core authentication logic. I had a strong suspicion that Bradley had attempted to optimize the system without understanding how the security tokens were validated. My suspicions were confirmed the next day when Jared sent me a text. He wrote that Bradley had deployed a database patch directly to production because the staging server was taking too long to restart. I stared at the message, shaking my head. It was the ultimate amateur mistake, and now the biggest client was paying the price. By Wednesday afternoon, the situation at Altus Shipping had deteriorated. Audrey Frost called me again, her voice tight with frustration. She told me they had suffered a complete authentication outage that lasted 20 minutes during their peak shipping hour. That 20 minutes of downtime had stalled their truck dispatch systems and cost the company thousands of dollars in delayed shipments. When she called Preston to complain, he had tried to blame their local internet provider, refusing to admit that his friend Bradley's patch had caused the crash. Audrey was furious. She informed me that she had officially sent a legal notice to the board of Summit Solutions. The notice stated that if the authentication system was not fully stable by Friday afternoon, Altus Shipping would invoke the reliability clause. She told me she had specified my name in the legal document as the only architect authorized to audit and repair the system. If Summit Solutions refused or failed to bring me in, Altus Shipping would declare a material breach of contract. Under the failure to perform terms, they would demand a full refund of the $2 million project cost and move their business to a competitor. As I sat in my home office listening to Audrey, I could picture the exact state of the Summit Solutions floor. I knew the panic that was setting in. In my 7 years there, I had seen how fragile our systems could be under stress if someone bypassed the safety checks. Preston's arrogance had finally collided with reality, and the developers I had spent years mentoring were the ones bearing the weight of his incompetence. It was a strange feeling, being completely detached from the chaos, yet knowing I held the only key to fixing it. I told Audrey that I was prepared to step in if needed, but I warned her that a simple rollback might not be enough if Bradley had corrupted the underlying database indices. On Thursday, Jared texted me that the office was in complete chaos. Preston was screaming at Bradley in his office, and the developers were being forced to work through the night to find the bug. But they were looking in the wrong place because Bradley had cleared the deployment logs to hide his mistake. Friday came and went, and the system remained unstable. On Monday morning at 9 o'clock, the database crashed again, blocking all logins for 45 minutes. Audrey did not wait any longer. She called the chief executive officer of Summit Solutions and invoked the clause. Within an hour, Audrey called me back to confirm that I was officially hired. She had negotiated a contractor rate of $250 an hour, which Summit Solutions would have to pay directly. My old salary had worked out to about $70 an hour, meaning I was returning to my old office at nearly 4 times my previous pay. I was given full authority over the systems and the engineering team for the duration of the repair. I agreed to start the following morning. Walking into the Summit Solutions building on Tuesday felt strange. I had spent 7 years there as an employee, but now I was entering as an independent consultant, backed by their most important client. Gabe, the security guard at the front desk, looked up and smiled when he saw me. He told me he had heard I was coming back and handed me a visitor pass. I clipped the plastic badge to my collar and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. When I walked onto the development floor, the reaction was immediate. Jared stood up and cheered, and Nora ran over to shake my hand. The relief in the room was palpable. The developers had been working 80-hour weeks trying to fix a system they did not fully understand, all while Preston threatened them with termination. I called a meeting in the main conference room. Bradley Higgins was already sitting there, looking defensive. He pointed at me and asked why I was there, claiming he was still the lead architect. I looked him in the eye and told him that his untested patch had cost the client thousands of dollars, and that I was here because the client had demanded me by name. I told him he could either assist me by explaining his changes, or he could sit in the corner and watch. Preston walked into the room a moment later. His face was red, and he looked like he had not slept in days. He told me that while I was a contractor, I still had to report to Bradley. I shook my head and pulled out the printout of the contract amendment Audrey had signed. I pointed to the signature line and explained that I reported directly to Audrey Frost at Alta Shipping and that I had final authority over all code deployments related to this project. Preston opened his mouth to argue, but he knew he had no leverage. If I walked out, the contract was dead and his career would be over. He turned and walked out of the conference room without saying another word. I turned back to the team and asked Jared to pull up the repository history. We had a system to fix, and we did not have any time to waste on office politics. We began our audit of the system at 11 o'clock. Bradley sat in the corner, silent and sullen, while Jared, Nora, and I examined the code repository. It did not take long to find the root cause of the failures. Bradley had modified the token generation service, replacing our proven security algorithms with a new library he had found online. He had done this to improve processing speed by a few milliseconds, but he had failed to realize that the legacy database systems at Alta Shipping could not parse the new format. When the servers ran under heavy load, the incompatible tokens caused a buffer overflow, crashing the authentication service. The rollback was straightforward, but I insisted on doing it systematically. We spent 3 hours verifying the legacy libraries and running tests in our staging environment, which we had to rebuild because Bradley had deleted the configuration files. Jared showed me the code repository, pointing out where Bradley had attempted to bypass the connection pooling. He had hard-coded the database credentials into the application context, which violated every security protocol we had established. Nora was working next to us, analyzing the index tables to ensure the bad deployments had not corrupted the transaction records. The atmosphere was focused, a sharp contrast to the panic that had ruled the office for the past week. I felt a familiar sense of satisfaction as we systematically cleaned up the mess. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we deployed the original, stable code to production. Within 10 minutes, the error logs cleared. Audrey called me at 2:30 to report that all their remote shipping terminals were online and operating normally. She thanked me and asked me to remain on site for the rest of the week to perform a complete system audit. I agreed, knowing that where there was one bad deployment, there were likely others. I spent Wednesday and Thursday digging through the server logs and deployment histories. What I found was a series of minor errors that Bradley had introduced, but on Thursday afternoon I discovered something much worse. I was reviewing the internal file share where sign-off documents were stored. I found a portable document format file named Database Release Authorization. The document was dated 3 days before my resignation, and it bore my signature, authorizing the deployment of Bradley's unstable security library. I stared at the screen, my heart rate rising. I had never seen this document before, and I had certainly never signed it. I had spent my final weeks warning Preston against this exact deployment. I zoomed in on the signature block. It was a digital copy of my signature, but it had been pasted onto the document. I opened the file metadata and checked the system logs. The document had been created and uploaded to the server on the Monday after my departure, hours after the first major database outage occurred. I performed a detailed forensic trace on the file upload event. The server access logs recorded the exact timestamp, the Internet Protocol address, and the machine identifier of the device that completed the transfer. The records showed the upload originated from the wireless access point located directly outside Preston's private office using his company-issued laptop. He had not even attempted to mask his activities, likely believing that no one would ever audit the system logs of a legacy file share. I verified the timestamp again. It was uploaded at 9:45 on Monday morning, exactly 15 minutes after Alta Shipping had threatened to cancel the contract. Preston had realized that the system failure was going to cost the company millions of dollars, and he had forged my signature on a retroactive authorization form to shift the blame to me. If the client sued Summit Solutions for damages, Preston could present this document to claim that the lead architect had approved the faulty deployment before resigning. I felt a cold anger settle over me. Pushing me out of the company was one thing, but attempting to ruin my professional reputation and expose me to legal liability was another. I copied the document, the metadata files, and the server access logs onto an encrypted USB drive. I then called my personal attorney, a man named Carl Vance, who specialized in corporate law and contract disputes. I explained the situation and sent him the files. Carl told me that this was a clear violation of state law. In Oregon, forging a document that affects financial relations is a Class C felony under Oregon Revised Statutes Section 165.013. Because the contract was with a California company, it also violated California Penal Code Section 470 for forgery. Carl advised me that because the authorization form was forged, the document was void ab initio, meaning it had no legal standing from the beginning. He told me I had enough evidence to seek criminal charges and file a civil suit for damages. I thanked him and told him to draft a formal demand letter. I had my evidence, and I had my target. It was time to end Preston's career at Summit Solutions. On Friday morning, I requested an urgent meeting with the Chief Technology Officer and the board's legal representative. I asked Preston Jennings to attend as well. We met in the executive conference room on the 5th floor. Preston walked in, attempting to look confident, but his hands were shaking as he poured himself a glass of water. The Chief Technology Officer, a reasonable man named Richard, asked why I had called the meeting, pointing out that the Altus system was already stable. I plugged my encrypted drive into the projector and pulled up the forged database release authorization form. I showed the signature block and then displayed the server logs, showing that the file had been uploaded by Preston's account 3 days after I had resigned. I explained that my signature had been forged to shield Preston and Bradley from the consequences of their failed deployment. Preston stood up, his face turning pale, and began to shout that I was trying to sabotage him. He claimed his credentials were stolen or that his account had been compromised. I was prepared for this defense. I pulled up the virtual private network logs for the weekend, showing that Preston's user account had logged in from his residential internet provider address. The session remained active throughout the time the document was created and uploaded. I pointed out that unless a hacker had broken into his home and used his physical laptop while he was logged in, he was the sole author of the file. The board's legal representative leaned forward, examined the logs, and advised Richard that any further defense would only increase their liability. Preston went silent, his shoulders slumping as he realized there was no escape. Once he sat down, I handed copies of the demand letter from my attorney to Richard and the board representative. I cited Oregon Revised Statutes Section 165.013 for forgery and California Penal Code Section 470. I explained that because the document was forged, it was void ab initio, and that Summit Solutions was exposed to severe legal liabilities for using fraud to cover up a contract failure. I also pointed out that Preston's actions constituted a gross breach of fiduciary duty to the company and its shareholders, as his fraud had put a $2 million contract and the firm's reputation in jeopardy. I told Richard that I was prepared to file a formal complaint with the district attorney and proceed with a civil lawsuit unless the board took immediate action. Richard looked at the evidence, his expression grim. He turned to the legal representative, who read the demand letter and nodded slowly. The evidence was irrefutable. Richard looked at Preston and told him to leave the room. Within 2 hours, the board announced that Preston Jennings and Bradley Higgins had been terminated for cause, effective immediately, with their severance packages completely voided. The board representative then turned to me and asked what it would take to keep Altus Shipping happy. I told him that my new company, Vance Systems Architecture LLC, would take over all architectural consulting for Summit Solutions on an external basis. My rate would be $300 an hour with a 20-hour minimum per project. I also specified that the development team would be restructured, with Jared promoted to lead developer. The board agreed to all my terms. Within 2 weeks, I signed the consulting agreement. I immediately reached out to Jared, Nora, and Sean. Having resigned from Summit Solutions, they were looking for new opportunities. I hired them as the founding employees of Advanced Systems Architecture LLC, offering them higher salaries, flexible hours, and a share of our project profits. Our first meeting was held in my home office, where we laid out the roadmap for the Altus shipping platform expansion. It was the most satisfying meeting of my professional life. We were no longer working to make an incompetent manager look good. We were working for ourselves and our clients. My consulting business grew rapidly over the next 6 months. I picked up 3 more major clients who had heard about the Altus recovery. I was making more than double my old salary while working fewer hours, and I had complete control over my projects. One evening, Clara and I were sitting on the back porch. The kids were asleep, and the house was quiet. Clara looked at me and remarked that I looked happier than I had in years. I smiled, realizing she was right. Getting pushed out of Summit Solutions was the best thing that could have happened to my career. It had forced me to step out of my comfort zone and build something of my own. Preston had tried to destroy my career to save his own, but his arrogance had only provided the catalyst for my success. The best revenge was not getting even. It was building a business so successful that their actions did not matter anymore. And as I watched the sunset over the Portland Hills, I knew I had done exactly that. My path had not been easy, but it was mine, and I had built a legacy based on integrity, hard work, and the absolute refusal to let someone else define my limits.